Hello, I'm Ed, and welcome to my YouTube channel, The Ozarks Then and Now. Stories of the Ozark Mountains past and present, its people, its places, and especially its murder and mayhem. This is episode 3 of Murder and Mayhem, Death in Dover. It is about the murders of 16 people in a 1-week time period in Dover, Arkansas, near Russellville. As usual, at the end of this video, excerpts from one of our other M&M videos for your curiosity and enjoyment. It can be a sewer out there. Shall we dive in? It took a whole week back in 1987, but Ronald Gene Simmons, a decorated military veteran, managed to kill 16 people. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15, 1940 in Chicago, Illinois. When he was not yet 3 years old, his father died, and his mother Loretta married William Griffin, a civil engineer. Simmons dropped out of school in 1957 and joined the U.S. Navy at age 17. He was stationed in Bremerton, Washington, where he met Becky. They were married in 1960. Over the next 18 years, the couple had 7 children. In 1963, Simmons left the Navy and approximately 2 years later joined the Air Force. During his distinguished 20-year military career, Simmons was awarded the Bronze Star, the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross for his service as an airman, and an Air Force ribbon for excellent marksmanship. Simmons retired from the Air Force and from military service on November 30, 1979, at the rank of Master Sergeant, or E7. First inkling that all was not well was less than 2 years later in April 1981. While living in Cloudcroft, New Mexico, the DHS began an investigation into allegations Simmons had fathered a child incestuously with his daughter, Sheila. Fearing arrest, Simmons fled New Mexico in late '81 with his family to the rural Ozark Mountains of Arkansas. They settled near Russellville, Arkansas, in the small town of Dover. The somewhat primitive residence they found on 13 acres known as Mockingbird Hill, was constructed of 2 older model mobile homes joined to form one larger home. There was no telephone nor indoor plumbing, and it was surrounded by a makeshift privacy fence, which was as high as 10 feet in some places. Since the house had a lack of plumbing, the Simmons family dug 3 cesspools or outhouse pits. As a fugitive from New Mexico, his frustrations grew. Simmons had a hard time holding even the low-paying jobs he landed due to his growing sexual predilection, causing many of the reports of inappropriate sexual advances. He quit a position as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight because of these reports. His family had by now reduced by 3. Sheila, his daughter that birthed his incestuous child, and eldest son Billy had moved on to have their own families. After a series of low-paying jobs, he quit his final job at a local Sinclair mini-mart 1 week before Christmas in December of 1987. Now Simmons' devils within had been growing stronger, and finally, in December of '87, they broke loose completely. Let the murder spree begin. A full-blown family Christmas reunion was planned. Over the next week, Simmons will kill 14 members of his own family, a former co-worker that had rejected his advances, and a stranger. He also wounded 4 others. This spree made him the most prolific mass murderer in Arkansas history, a morally suspect title for sure. On the morning of December 22nd, he first killed his wife Becky and eldest son Gene by bludgeoning them with a crowbar and shooting them with a .22 caliber pistol. He then killed his 3-year-old granddaughter Barbara by strangulation. Simmons dumped the bodies in one of the SS pits he had forced his children to dig previously. The count is up to 3. Simmons then waited for his other children to return from school for Christmas break. Upon their arrival, he told them he had presents for them, but wanted to give them one at a time. But one by one, he snuffed the lives of his loved ones. He first killed his daughter, 17-year-old Loretta, whom Simmons strangled, and just to make sure, he held her under the water in a rain barrel. can't have a survivor wandering about, or maybe he doubted his skill at strangling people to death. The 3 other children, Eddie, Marianne, and Becky, were then killed in the same way and subsequently dumped in the cesspit. The count is now 7 deaths at his hand. In this rural area, no one has any idea what is going on at the innocuous named Mockingbird Hill. 4 days later, the day after Christmas, around midday, the remaining members of his family arrived at the home, as Simmons had invited them over for the holidays. The first to be killed was Simmons' son Billy and his wife Renata, who were both shot dead with a .22 Ruger revolver, bringing the total to 9. He then strangled and drowned their 20-month-old son Trey. Simmons also shot and killed his oldest daughter, Sheila, whom he had sexually abused, and her husband, Dennis McNulty. Simmons then strangled his child by Sheila, 7-year-old Sylvia Gale, and finally his 21-month-old grandson, Michael, bringing the total to 14 murders, all family members. Laid the bodies of 5 of the last 7 he killed in neat rows in the house. Their bodies were covered with coats, except that of Sheila, who was covered with Rebecca Simmons' best tablecloths. Simmons apparently felt a different attachment to Sheila. The bodies of Trey and Michael, Sheila's other children, were wrapped in plastic sheeting and left in abandoned cars at the end of the lane. One might question if Simmons felt a jealousy of Sheila's other children. The devils dwelling inside Simmons are now at full bore. He is out of control. After the murders, Simmons drove to a Sears store in Russellville, where he retrieved Christmas gifts that he had previously ordered for his family. Does this indicate that possibly these murders he did not intend for them to take place? He ordered Christmas gifts. But then there were never Christmas gifts at the house, only death. That night he went for a drink at a local bar before returning to home, where he spent the rest of the evening and the following day drinking beer and watching television, with 14 dead bodies in the house, cesspits, and cars around him. Remorse does not seem to be an attribute at this time. Simmons was not done yet. He had a plan. He purchased another firearm, and on December 28th, in under an hour, he visited the law firm where he had previously met Secretary Kathy Cribbins, whose last name at that time was Kendrick. Simmons had been infatuated with Kendrick, but she had rejected him. Again, his sexual fantasies were clouding his rapidly deteriorating mind. After he walked into the office, he shot and killed Kendrick. Total murders at this point are 15 if you're losing count. He next went to the oil company office where he intended to kill the owner, Russell Rusty Taylor. Taylor was also the owner of the Sinclair Mini Mart from which Simmons had recently resigned. He shot and wounded Taylor, then inexplicably killed James David Chafin, a seeming stranger. Chafin was the only deceased victim who was a complete stranger to Simmons. His final target was his former supervisor at the Woodline Motor Freight Company. He shot twice, wounding her. He then ordered one of the employees at gunpoint to call the police. Peculiar, don't you think? When they arrived, Simmons handed over his gun and surrendered without resistance. Over the course of the 40-minute-long rampage, Simmons had killed 2 and injured 4 others. Total murders now at 16. After his arrest, Simmons underwent a psychiatric evaluation where he was found fit to stand trial. He first went on trial for the murders of Kendrick and Chafin and was found guilty on May 12, 1988, being sentenced to death. He made an additional statement under oath supporting his sentence. I, Ronald Gene Simmons, Sr., want it to be known that it is my wish and my desire that absolutely no action by anybody be taken to appeal or in any way change this sentence. It is further respectfully request that this sentence be carried out expeditiously. He next went on trial for the murders of the 14 family members and again found guilty on February 10, 1989, and being sentenced to death by lethal injection. The then governor, Bill Clinton, signed his death warrant. What was Simmons' motive for the spree of death and destruction? Well, Simmons had discovered that Becky was planning a divorce, and she was surreptitiously saving money to that end. Pile this information on the anger and paranoia that he was already experiencing, and you have the formula for a cocktail of violence. After all, what is left to lose for this man? He will be exposed as a sexual deviant, a ne'er-do-well that cannot hold a job and support his family, and he will have failed at his marriage. A successful, decorated military veteran taken down to this pitiful position. Pride is a mountain difficult to remain on when troubles are trying to dislodge you. Ronald Gene Simmons was buried in a potter's field because no one wanted to claim his body. As promised, there are a few scenes from Murder and Mayhem Episode 2, Suicide by Cop. In Jasper, Arkansas, on this particular day, tragedy struck on this bridge. A couple had hijacked a Continental Trailways passenger bus in Little Rock and told them to drive to Jasper, Arkansas, whereat they disembarked from the bus, threatened to kill people, and asked the police to shoot them. They believed that they would rise again in 3 days from the dead, but they remained stubbornly dead here 41 years later. No one else was injured, no one else was hurt, no one else was killed. Just Keith and Kate. He died on this day, and so did she. He died from a gunshot from her because his gun misfired when he pointed at his head, so she shot him, and then she turned the gun and fired on herself through the eye. She lived for a bit. They took her to the hospital where she was pronounced dead. And I thank you for watching. If you'd like to subscribe, I would appreciate it. Thank you.